My name is Nora Hayes, and I am 32 years old, a major in the United States Army Medical Corps and the Chief of Trauma Surgery at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. My older sister Claire told my parents that I had received a dishonorable discharge from the United States Army and that I had forged my military caregiver deferment paperwork, and my parents, people who raised me in a household where military service was spoken of the way most families speak of faith, believed her completely, without making a single phone call to my commanding officer, without contacting the university, without once looking me in the eyes and asking whether any of it was true. They blocked my number, cut off all contact, and they did not come to my commissioning ceremony, the day I stood in dress uniform and raised my right hand and was sworn in as an officer of the United States Army Medical Corps. The moment that in this country, in every military family I have ever known, is treated as the most sacred threshold a daughter can cross. And they were not there. They were not at my wedding either. For 5 years, I was no one's daughter. Then last January, at 3 a.m, my pager went off, and the woman on the stretcher being rushed into my trauma bay with a ruptured spleen and uncontrolled internal bleeding, unconscious and dying, was Claire. Before we go any further, if that first minute hit something in you, take a second and hit like. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Now let me take you back. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Hayes household, but only one who was ever truly seen. My sister Claire is 3 years older than me, and from the very beginning, she understood something I never did. That in this family, love was a performance, and she had been born ready for the stage. She did community theater, led student council, played varsity soccer, and had the particular gift of making every adult in the room feel like they were the most interesting person she had ever encountered. My parents, Frank and Ellen Hayes, lived in Bethesda, Maryland, in a house that was always clean, always presentable, always camera-ready for company. Frank had spent 20 years as a facilities director for a federal defense contractor, and Ellen worked part-time as an office administrator, and together they ran the household the way Frank managed a job site. On schedule, on budget, with no tolerance for deviation. They valued 2 things above all else: appearances and obedience. And Claire delivered both with a consistency that made it look effortless. I was the quiet one, the one with her nose buried in a biochemistry textbook at Thanksgiving while Claire held court at the table. The one who ate lunch alone in the library during the weeks leading up to the state science fair while everyone else went to Claire's soccer games. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I was simply invisible, and there is a difference, one that took me years to fully articulate, between being forgotten and never having been fully seen in the first place. When I was in 8th grade, I placed second at the Maryland State Science Fair, the only student from our middle school to qualify that year. But that same weekend, Claire had a regional theater showcase, and my parents went to the showcase. When I came home carrying the ribbon, my father glanced at it from across the kitchen and said, "That's nice, Nora." And that was the entire conversation. He never asked what my project was about. He never did. I told myself it didn't hurt. I poured everything into my grades, my AP classes, my applications, because I had decided that if I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I would become the daughter they could not ignore. And for one brief, shining moment, I was exactly that. The day I received my acceptance letter and full scholarship from the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, the military's own medical school in Bethesda, funded through an Army HPSP commission, something shifted in that house that I had never felt before. My father read the letter at the kitchen table, and I watched his eyebrows go up slowly, the way they did when something genuinely caught him off guard. Uniformed Services University, he said, reading the name twice, turning it over in his mouth like a word he had been waiting years to say out loud. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said in a voice that carried more weight than he probably intended, Maybe you'll make something of yourself after all, Nora. It wasn't a compliment, not exactly, but it was the closest thing to one I'd ever received from him. And I held on to it the way a person holds on to oxygen in a room that doesn't have enough. My mother called her sister that night, then both neighbors, and the pride in her voice had a frequency I'd never heard directed at me before. Pure, unfiltered, genuine. But it was what I saw across the kitchen table during that dinner that I have returned to 1,000 times since, running it through my mind frame by frame, looking for what I missed. Claire was visiting for the weekend when the letter arrived, 25 years old, and working as a senior territory coordinator for a pharmaceutical marketing firm in Arlington. Successful by any reasonable measure, but never quite at the ceiling her personality had always seemed to promise. She smiled when Dad read the letter aloud, and it was a beautiful smile, the kind she could produce on command. But that night, watching her from across the table, I caught something behind her eyes that I did not have the experience to correctly read. A calculation, a recalibration. At the time I told myself she was just tired from the drive. I was feeding her ammunition, and I didn't know it yet. That week, Claire started calling me more frequently, 2, 3 times a week, asking about my class schedule, my roommates, my professors, the social dynamics of being one of the few women in the surgical track. She remembered every name I mentioned. I thought my sister was finally seeing me. I thought that my commissioning and acceptance into medical school had unlocked something between us, some version of respect that had always been just out of reach. I was wrong. Every detail I gave her, every vulnerability I revealed, every name I dropped. She was cataloging all of it with a patience I did not recognize as dangerous because I had never imagined she would need to use it against me. Third year of medical school is when everything cracked open. My closest friend, the woman who had, in the most literal sense, kept me functional through first and second year, was a fellow Army Medical Corps student named Jade Torres, a kid who had grown up bouncing between 3 foster families in Houston, Texas, who possessed the sharpest sense of humor I've ever been in the presence of, and who had absolutely zero patience for self-pity in either of us. She was the one who sat on the apartment floor with me during our first anatomy exam week, when I had called home and my mother had said, with a tone of complete routine, "Can't talk right now, Nora. Claire's having a rough day at work." Jade was the one who looked at me when I set the phone down and said, without ceremony, "Their loss. Now get up. We have cadavers to memorize." She saved my life, though not the way I would later save hers or try to. She saved it in all the ways that happen before a hospital is ever involved. In August of our 3rd year, Jade was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. No family, no support system. No one on the other end of the phone, except me. I went to the dean's office the next morning, explained the situation in full, and he approved a formal medical leave of absence. 1 semester, caregiver status, complete documentation filed with the registrar's office, my spot held through the spring semester. It was legitimate, it was documented, and it was the only thing that made sense to me. I moved into Jade's spare room, drove her to chemotherapy, sat in the oncology ward at 3 in the morning, when the pain was bad enough that she gripped the bed rail and breathed through her teeth, and I could do nothing but be there. I called Claire to tell her. I don't fully understand why, except that I may have still believed in the version of her that had been calling me 3 times a week asking about my life. I told her about Jade, about the leave of absence, about the plan to return in January. Claire's voice was perfectly warm, perfectly steady. "Oh my God, Nora, I'm so sorry. Take all the time you need. I won't say a word to Mom and Dad. You know how they worry." 3 days later, she called our parents. I don't know the precise words she used that night. I would not learn the full scope of what she told them until years later, when the entire architecture came down in one terrible and ironic hour. But the damage was instant. The call came at 11 at night. I was sitting in a plastic chair beside Jade's hospital bed. She had reacted badly to the latest chemotherapy round, and they had admitted her overnight. and my phone lit up with my father's name on the screen. His voice, when I answered, was the particular cold I'd only heard him use once before, when a contractor had defrauded his department and he had been the last one to find out. "Your sister told us everything," he said. "The dishonorable discharge, the forged caregiver paperwork, all of it. Dad, that's not—" She showed us the messages. She showed us proof. I pressed my free hand flat against the wall to hold myself steady, and I told him exactly where I was. Sitting beside my dying friend in a hospital room with a fully documented and dean-approved leave of absence on file at the registrar's office, with the dean's direct number available if he wanted to call right now, tonight. His response was the one I still hear in quiet rooms years later. "Monica said you'd have a story ready." He used her old name by mistake, or maybe not by mistake at all. Then my mother got on the line, and her voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard before, and she said, "How could you lie to us for a whole year?" And I tried to tell her about the paperwork, about the documentation, about everything that was verifiable and waiting to be verified. And my father came back and said, "Enough. Don't call this house until you're ready to tell the truth. You've embarrassed this family enough." The line went dead. I sat on that hospital floor for 20 minutes. Jade's IV beeped steadily on the other side of the curtain. My phone screen still showed the call duration, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That was how long it took my parents to erase me. 20 minutes later, a text from Claire. "I'm sorry, Nora. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep your secret anymore." She was not sorry. She had just executed the most precise strike of her adult life, and she had done it with a broken heart emoji as a signature and a story so airtight that my own parents never paused to question it. I was nearly 2,000 miles from Bethesda. I had $46 in my checking account, and I had just become no one's daughter. Over the next 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 calls went to voicemail. By the 4th, my father's number was blocked. My mother blocked me 2 days after that. I sent 2 emails, one brief, one comprehensive, both with my leave of absence paperwork attached as a PDF, the dean's direct phone number included, Jade's oncologist's name, and contact information provided. Neither email received a response. I wrote a handwritten letter, mailed it priority from San Antonio, and 5 days later it came back to my mailbox, returned to sender, and unopened with my mother's handwriting on the return label, as if she had touched the envelope as little as possible before sending it away from her. I called Aunt Grace, my father's younger sister, the only person in our extended family who had always treated my accomplishments and Claire's as equally real. And Grace called my father that same evening and tried to tell him about the leave of absence. He told her to stay out of it and hung up on her. 5 days, 14 calls, 2 emails, 1 handwritten letter, 1 family intermediary. Every single attempt rejected, blocked, or returned. And here is the thing about what happened next that I have had to sit with for years. This wasn't new. This was the pattern of my entire childhood compressed into its most brutal and final form. Every state competition they had skipped, every science fair they had missed, every time Claire's version of events had been accepted without question while mine was waved away. This was simply the last and loudest version of something that had been true my whole life. Claire had not invented a dynamic. She had weaponized one that had always been there. On the 6th day, I stopped calling, not because I had given up, but because I understood that they had made their choice a long time ago, and Claire had simply given them permission to stop pretending otherwise. Jade Torres died on a Sunday morning in December, in a hospice room with pale winter light coming through the blinds and a monitor that went flat with a sound I will carry for the rest of my life. I was the only person in the room. No one from my family called. The one person I had told, Claire, was too occupied tending the lie she had planted to register that the reason for my leave of absence had just stopped breathing. I organized a small funeral. 6 people came. Jade's former foster sister drove 4 hours from Austin. Two classmates, a nurse from the oncology ward, who had grown genuinely fond of her. I stood at the front of a chapel that could hold 60 people and read a eulogy to rows of empty pews. And I did not cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I had been crying for 3 months straight and there was simply nothing left. That night, alone in the apartment that had been both of ours, her coffee mug still on the counter and her jacket still hanging by the door, I opened my laptop and stared at the USU re-enrollment form. And then I found it, tucked inside Jade's copy of Grey's Anatomy, our running joke, the textbook she had bookmarked in 17 places with sticky notes and margin annotations. This one was in the chapter on the pancreas, in her handwriting, shaky from the last round of chemo but deliberate, every letter formed with intention. Finish what you started, Nora. Become the doctor I know you are. And don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are. She had written it weeks before she died. She had known she would not be there when I needed the push. I closed the laptop. I opened it again. I filled out the re-enrollment form. 2 options, crumble or climb. I chose to climb, not for my parents, not for revenge, but for Jade. And for the version of myself she had believed in, with a conviction that shamed me for ever doubting it. I went back in January with no family support, no safety net, and a grief I carried the way soldiers carry gear. Not because it was comfortable, but because putting it down was not an option. I took out additional student loans, accepted a part-time research position, and ate hospital cafeteria, leftovers more times than I will ever publicly admit. Medical school does not pause for personal loss. Anatomy exams do not care that you cried in the supply closet at 2 in the morning. Clinical rotations do not get shorter because your family has disowned you, and the person who kept you going just died. So I stopped waiting for conditions to improve, and I started working with the particular focus of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything still left to prove. I graduated on time, and no one from Bethesda came. I matched into a surgical residency at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, one of the country's most demanding Level 1 military trauma centers. And that is where I met Dr. Carol Briggs, 58 years old, Chief of Surgery Emeritus, a woman who had trained at Johns Hopkins, served 2 tours as a forward surgical team commander, and who possessed the quality that marks every truly great mentor in that she never allowed self-pity to occupy more than 30 seconds of my attention, before redirecting the energy somewhere useful. She became the mentor I desperately needed, and over years, the closest thing I had to the mother figure I'd lost through no fault of my own. 3rd year of residency, I met Marcus Webb. He was a federal public defender with the D.C. Circuit, doing pro bono clinic work at a community health center near the hospital. Calm eyes, dry humor, and the particular quality of a man who has spent his career listening to people tell him the worst things that have ever happened to them and who has never once flinched at the weight of it. He was the first person I told the full story to, who did not look at me with pity, who did not try to fix it or reframe it or suggest what I should have done differently. He just listened, and when I finished, he said 4 words. You deserve better. That was enough. We were married on a Saturday in October in Dr. Carol Briggs's backyard in Bethesda. 30 guests, a string quartet that played better than we had any right to expect, and Marcus's father, who had driven down from Philadelphia the night before, walked me down the aisle. I had sent a formal invitation to my parents in Bethesda, the same one every other guest received, and it came back the way my letter had. Unopened, my mother's handwriting on the return label. Aunt Grace was there, though, and she cried enough for 2 parents, and then some. After the ceremony, Dr. Briggs pressed a sealed envelope into my hands and said quietly, "A nomination. Don't open it yet. You're not ready." I put it in my desk drawer without asking questions, because I had learned by then that Carol Briggs understood the timing of things better than I did. 5 years passed. I became someone my parents would not recognize. I need to pause here for a moment, Because if you have ever been in a situation where the people who should have known you best chose to believe someone else's version of you instead, if you have ever been erased by the very people you needed most to see you, drop a comment below and tell me. And if you think my parents are about to reckon with everything they have done, type it out. Let's keep going, because what happens next is something I genuinely did not see coming. By January of last year, I was 32 years old, a major in the Army Medical Corps, and the chief of trauma surgery at Walter Reed, a position I had held for 2 years, the youngest person in the department's history to carry that title. I had a house in Rockville with a front porch that caught the morning light at an angle that made even January look livable, a husband who made me genuinely laugh every single day, and a golden retriever named Ranger, formally named for the Army Rangers because Marcus thought it was fitting and because Jade would have found it insufferably earnest and loved it entirely, who had never once judged me for eating cereal at midnight after a 20-hour shift. It was a good life, a real one, built brick by brick with my own hands. But there is a specific kind of ache that does not fully fade no matter how good the life gets. It lives in the hollow space between your ribs where a family is supposed to be. I did not wake up crying anymore. I did not check my phone hoping for a Bethesda area code. But every Thanksgiving there was a moment, just a flash, where I set the table and counted the plates and felt the absence the way people describe a missing limb. Phantom, persistent, structurally undeniable. Aunt Grace still called every Sunday. She was my thread back to that world, the one point of connection I had chosen to keep. And I never asked about my parents or Claire, but always listened when Grace volunteered something. Mom and Dad were healthy. Claire had gotten divorced 2 years before and was now a senior territory account executive for Boston Scientific's Medical Devices Division, selling surgical tools to operating rooms across the Mid-Atlantic. And the irony of that particular career arc was genuinely not lost on me. Last month, Grace called with something different in her voice. Careful, measured in a way that told me she was choosing her words with particular attention. "Nora," she said, "there's something I need to tell you about Claire. Something concerning." And before she could finish, my hospital pager went off. Trauma activation. I told Grace I would call her back. I never got the chance because what Grace was trying to warn me about was already in motion, doing approximately 60 miles an hour on I-495 in a sedan that was about to run a red light at an intersection in Bethesda. And within the hour, the thing Grace had been trying to tell me about would be lying on my operating table, bleeding out, with my parents in the waiting room and my name on the chart. I just didn't know it yet. Let me back up, though, because what Claire had done was not a single lie. It had been a campaign. And Grace had been feeding me pieces of it over the years, reluctantly and carefully, like someone diffusing a bomb one wire at a time, because she knew that giving it all at once would be too much to hold. The picture she had assembled was worse than I had imagined. For 5 years, Claire maintained the narrative at every family gathering, every holiday table, every birthday dinner where my absence required explanation. She had performed the role of the grieving older sister with the dedication of a career actress, lowering her voice when my name came up, shaking her head, saying things like, "We don't really talk about Nora anymore, it's too painful for Mom and Dad," and letting the silence do the rest of the work. But she did not stop at silence. She told our grandmother I was homeless. She told Uncle Ray's wife that she'd heard from mutual friends I was in and out of rehab. She told our mother on Christmas Eve 2 years ago that she had tried to reach out to me, that she had begged me to come home, and that I had refused, that I was the one who had cut them off, that I was the one who had decided this family wasn't worth my time. She flipped the entire story. She needed our parents not to forget me, but to believe that I had abandoned them, because then their grief became justification. Their silence became reasonable. And she remained, without competition, the only daughter who had stayed. She was not protecting them. She was protecting her position. And there was one more layer to it that I had not known until 6 months before the accident. Marcus had been sitting on it for 2 years when he finally set his coffee mug down on the kitchen table with the careful deliberateness of a man delivering news in his lawyer voice, and told me that someone using a false name had contacted the HR department at Walter Reed 2 years prior, inquiring about my employment status, asking whether I had ever been disciplined, questioning whether my credentials and military record were legitimate. A colleague of his traced the inquiry. The IP address resolved to a Bethesda address. Claire had not just told a lie and moved on. She had been actively searching for anything she could use to keep the story alive, to maintain the architecture she had built, to find something that would prove to anyone who might start to question her that I was a fraud. She found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the fact that she had been looking for 2 years transformed what she had done from a moment of cruelty into something far more deliberate, far more architectural, and far more difficult to fully comprehend. I could have done something then, called a lawyer, forced the confrontation, walked into my parents' kitchen in Bethesda and laid every piece of documentation on the same table where my father had read my acceptance letter years before. But I didn't, because life was already in the process of doing it for me, in the most brutal and ironic way I could not have designed if I had spent years trying. It started with a pager at 3 a.m. on a Thursday in January. The screen glowed in the dark beside the bed. Level 1 trauma. MVA, single female, 35 years old, blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable, ETA 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes and driving in 6. The roads outside Rockville empty and wet. That particular quality of darkness that January gives the Mid-Atlantic corridor. I ran through the case on the drive in the way I always do. Mechanism of injury, probable organ involvement, surgical options. Motor vehicle collision, blunt abdominal trauma, unstable vitals. Likely splenic rupture, possible hepatic laceration. I had done this surgery more times than I could count. I badged through the ambulance bay and walked straight to the trauma bay. My team was already assembling. 2 residents, the charge nurse, anesthesia on standby. I picked up the intake tablet from the station and swiped to the incoming patient chart. Claire Hayes, date of birth, March 14, 1990. Emergency contact. Frank Hayes, father. I stopped walking. The hallway noise, the beeping monitors, the intercom, the squeak of shoe soles on the floor, pulled back from me like a tide going out. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, I was not the chief of trauma surgery at Walter Reed. I was a 26-year-old sitting on a hospital floor in San Antonio with a phone still warm in my hand and a dial tone playing into the dark of a room where my friend lay sleeping through a morphine drip. Nurse Dana appeared at my shoulder. "You okay, Major?" I looked up, blinked, set the tablet down. "I'm fine. Prep Bay 2 and get Dr. Kim on standby." The ambulance siren was already audible in the distance, getting closer. And behind it, I knew before I could see them, were 2 people I had not spoken to in 5 years. The ambulance doors opened and the stretcher came fast. Claire strapped down, unconscious, oxygen mask fogging with shallow breaths, blood on her shirt, one arm hanging limp off the side rail. The paramedics gave numbers in rapid succession, blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, 2 large-bore IVs running wide open. And then, behind the stretcher, running, my parents. My mother looked like she had aged a decade since I had last seen her hair thinner, her face drawn tight with the particular terror of a parent who has just received the worst possible phone call at the worst possible hour. She was in a bathrobe with her slippers on the wrong feet. My father was in a flannel shirt and jeans thrown on in the dark, and his face was the color of old paper. "That's my daughter," he said loudly, past the triage nurse attempting to redirect him. "Where are they taking her? I need to speak to whoever is in charge right now." Nurse Rosa, who had worked triage at this hospital for 9 years and had seen every possible variation of panicked family come through those doors, put both hands up with practiced calm. "Sir, family is directed to the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already assembled. The chief is handling this case personally. Get me the chief right now, my father said. Rosa glanced through the glass partition toward the trauma bay. Toward me, standing there gowned and gloved, my badge at chest level where anyone could read it clearly. I gave her the smallest possible shake of my head. Not now. Rosa turned back to my father, composed. Sir, the chief is preparing for surgery. You will be updated as soon as possible. The waiting area is this way. My parents were led down the hall. Mom's lips were moving in something that might have been a prayer, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Dad kept turning back, looking through every window he passed. And then I heard him say it, through the partition glass, to no one in particular. She's all we have. Please, she's all we have. As if I had never existed. I went into the scrub room alone and gave myself 30 seconds. I turned on the faucet, let the water run hot over my hands, and looked at my reflection in the stainless steel surface above the sink. Warped, distorted, the way everything felt in that particular moment. Scrub cap on, badge visible. The face of a woman who had been surgically removed from her own family tree and was now being asked to operate on the woman who had held the saw. Part of me wanted to call Dr. Kim, step back, let someone else carry this. Let my parents owe their daughter's life to a stranger rather than to me. It would have been cleaner, simpler. But there was a woman on that table with a ruptured spleen, and what the imaging suggested was a grade 3 hepatic laceration, and she was losing blood at a rate that gave her approximately 30 to 40 minutes before the outcome became unrecoverable. And the best surgeon in that building was me. I paged Dr. Kim directly. I have a conflict of interest. The patient is an immediate family member. I am disclosing it now and documenting it in the chart. If at any point my judgment is compromised, you take the lead, no questions asked. Kim's voice was steady. Understood, Major. I told Dana to note the disclosure in the nursing record. Everything documented, everything by the book, everything on paper. Then I pulled on fresh gloves, pushed through the OR doors, and looked down at the table. My sister's face, still bruised from the impact, the oxygen mask fogging and clearing with each shallow breath, looked smaller than I remembered, and older, with worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. For 3 seconds, I allowed myself to look at her fully. She was not the woman who had spent 5 years hunting for a way to end my career. She was not the person who had built an architecture of lies and maintained it through 5 winters of family dinners. She was a body on my table with a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 hepatic laceration, and that was exactly how I needed to see her. Scalpel. 3 hours and 40 minutes. The ruptured spleen came out cleanly. The hepatic laceration demanded precision suturing, layer by layer. The kind of repair where speed will kill the patient and only patience will bring them through. 2 mesenteric vessels, both actively bleeding, clamped, cauterized, controlled. I did not speak unless I needed to. Suction, clamp, lap pad, retract. My hands moved the way 10,000 hours of training had shaped them to move. Steady when steadiness was what the moment required, fast when time was the critical variable. The residents were watching. They always watched during my cases, and I could feel their attention sharpen as the hepatic repair became technically demanding. I did not falter. I could not afford to. At 6:48 in the morning, I placed the final closing stitch. Claire's vitals had normalized. Output was clear. She was alive. Dr. Kim, who had stood silently in the corner of the OR for the final 90 minutes, pulled down his mask and said quietly, "Major Hayes, that was flawless." I peeled off my gloves, dropped them in the bin, and washed my hands in the automatic way I've done it 10,000 times. "No," I said. "This one's mine." I straightened my scrub top, checked my badge, took one breath, and walked toward the waiting room. The hallway had never felt so long. I have to stop here for just a second because if you are listening to this right now and you want to know what it feels like to walk toward the people who erased you, wearing the proof of everything they refuse to believe, drop a comment below and tell me what you think happens next. And if you aren't subscribed yet, right now is the moment. Because what happens in the next 5 minutes in that waiting room is something I replayed in my head 1,000 times before it actually happened, and I never imagined it would look quite like this. Subscribe, and I'll take you right there. The waiting room at 7 in the morning has a particular quality. The fluorescent lights carrying the specific exhaustion of a night that has run too long. A television in the corner murmuring weather reports to no one. Families scattered in chairs with the hollowed-out faces of people who have been waiting for news that hasn't arrived. In the center row, sitting rigid and sleepless and terrified, were my parents. I pushed through the double doors still in my surgical scrubs, mask pulled down around my neck, scrub cap off, hair pulled back, and my badge hanging at chest level where anyone within 6 feet could read it without difficulty. Major Nora Hayes, MD, FACS. Chief, Department of Trauma Surgery. My father stood first. It was always his instinct to stand, to establish command of a room before the room knew he was in charge. Doctor, how is she? Is Claire? He stopped. His eyes had dropped to my badge, risen to my face, dropped to the badge again, and I watched the recognition move through him the way a structural failure moves through a wall, starting somewhere beneath the surface, traveling through every load-bearing point before the damage finally shows. His hands trembled. My mother looked up a half-second later, and her lips parted without producing any sound, and her right hand shot to my father's forearm and gripped it with a force that, I would later learn, left 4 bruises, shaped like her fingertips, pressed into the flannel of his sleeve. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that contained 5 years. I spoke first, in the same voice I used to address every family in that room. Calm, clinical, precise. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I am Dr. Hayes, Chief of Trauma Surgery at this facility. Your daughter Claire sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 hepatic laceration in the accident. Surgery was successful. She is stable and currently in the ICU. You will be able to see her in approximately 1 hour. Not Mom, not Dad, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. I watched those 3 words land in both of them at the same moment. Watched them cut with the accuracy of something small and extremely precise. Through the glass partition behind me, Dana and 2 nurses were watching. They had put it together. I could see it in the way their faces had gone completely still. My mother moved first, taking 1 step toward me with her arms already lifting, a sob already breaking through her chest before she could contain it. Nora! Oh my God! Nora! I stepped back, half a step, no more. Polite and unmistakable in the same motion. She froze. Her hands hung in the air between us for a long, terrible moment and then, slowly and painfully, dropped back to her sides. My father's voice came out low and stripped of its usual authority. You're a doctor. I am. You're the chief. I am. But Claire said, and then he stopped, and I could see the machinery of his mind trying to reassemble 5 years of certainty that was crumbling in real time, brick by brick, in a hospital waiting room under fluorescent lights. My mother's voice broke completely. We thought you dropped out. We thought she told us you were... And I said evenly, without performance, because I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the car and the shower and the dark before sleep, and had never once imagined it would happen in surgical scrubs. She told you I received a dishonorable discharge, that I had forged my caregiver documentation, that I was homeless, that I refused to contact you. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. None of it was true. Not a single word. Behind the glass, I saw Dana press her hand to her mouth. Dr. Santos, the second-year surgical resident, looked away, jaw tight. Dana set her clipboard down on the nurse's station and did not pick it up again. My father tried to redirect, old instinct, the need to control the frame. "This isn't the time or the place, Nora. Your sister is in the ICU." And I said, without raising my voice a single degree, "I know. I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she survives to have this conversation. So yes, Dad, I'm aware of where she is." He had nothing. For the first time in my life, the man who had never been at a loss for a ruling had absolutely nothing to say. My mother's voice had dropped to a whisper. "The letters. You said you sent letters." 2 emails with my leave of absence paperwork attached. 1 handwritten letter mailed priority. "You sent it back unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the envelope." She pressed her fist against her mouth. "I called 14 times in 5 days. I asked Aunt Grace to speak with you. You told her to stay out of it and hung up on her." I was not accusing. I was reciting. These were facts, and facts do not need volume to carry weight. Then Dana appeared at the door with the expression of someone delivering routine hospital business into a room that was anything but routine. "Major Hayes, I'm sorry to interrupt. The Director of Clinical Excellence stopped by during the overnight and asked me to pass along that the nomination committee for the annual Military Medical Excellence Award has confirmed your selection, and the Surgeon General's office sends their congratulations on tonight's surgical outcome." She said it with complete procedural calm, because she had no way of knowing she had just detonated a second device in the same room. My mother looked at me with eyes swollen almost completely shut. I said simply, "It's an internal recognition. It's nothing." I turned to Dana. "Thank you. I need to check post-op vitals. Excuse me." I walked toward the ICU corridor with measured steps and a straight spine, and I did not look back. But I heard my mother's voice behind me. Small, completely undone. The voice of someone meeting the full weight of a mistake that cannot be unmade. "Jerry, what have we done?" And for the first time in my memory, my father said nothing, because silence was, at that particular moment, the only honest thing he had left. 4 hours later, I walked into the ICU for the standard post-operative assessment. Claire's eyes were open, glassy and unfocused from the anesthesia, tracking the ceiling, then the IV pole, then the doorway as I stepped through it. She squinted. Read my badge, read it again. The color drained from her face in a way I've seen before, but only in patients who have just been handed a prognosis they were not prepared to receive. "Nora." Her voice was barely there. "Good morning, Claire. You sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 hepatic laceration. Surgery went well. You're going to make a full recovery." "You're a doctor." Not a question, a reckoning. "I am the chief of this department, have been for 2 years. I watched the same spectrum move across her face that had moved across my father's in the waiting room. Confusion, disbelief, fear, and then, with a flicker I recognized from 32 years of watching her operate, calculation. Even now, lying in a hospital bed with my sutures literally holding her liver in place, Claire was trying to find the angle. "Nora, listen to me. I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything to me," I said, and I nodded toward the glass door where our parents were standing in the hallway watching, faces wrecked, eyes red. "You need to explain it to them." I updated her chart, checked the drainage, and left without another word. I did not stay to hear what came next, but the entire ICU floor heard it because Claire's room was not soundproof, and neither, as it turned out, was the truth. And I have to stop here for just one moment, because I want to know what you think happened when my parents walked into that room. Option A. Claire finally told the truth. Option B. She doubled down on the lie. Option C. She played the victim. Drop your answer in the comments right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because the next part of this story is where everything that has been building for 5 years comes completely apart. Go ahead and subscribe. I'll be right here. I learned what happened from Dana, who heard it from the ICU nurse stationed just outside the room, where the glass partition offered absolutely no acoustic protection. If you answered option C, you know my sister. The moment our parents walked in, Claire began crying. Not quietly, but the kind of sobbing that pulls at surgical stitches and spikes the heart monitor, the kind designed to fill every cubic inch of a room and leave no space for anything else. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. I never meant for it to go this far. I was scared for her. I was trying to protect everyone. My father stood at the foot of the bed, his voice barely under control. Claire. Nora is a surgeon. She's the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital. I didn't know that. She said she sent letters, emails. She called 14 times. She asked Grace to intervene. My mother's voice had gone flat in a way I'd never heard from her. Is that true? She's exaggerating. You know how she always. Grace tried to tell us, my father said, and this time his voice cracked. Not from sadness, but from the sound of 5 years of structural certainty failing all at once. 2 years ago, Grace called and said Nora was in residency, a surgeon. And you told us Grace was lying, just trying to cause drama. Grace doesn't know the whole story. Then what is the full story, Claire? What came out of Ellen Hayes in that ICU room was the sound of a woman who had spent 5 years choosing the wrong thing and had finally run out of ways not to know it. Claire, backed into the corner of her hospital bed with IVs in both arms and my sutures holding her abdomen together, did the only thing still available to her. She pivoted from defense to offense. Fine, she's a doctor, good for her. But she abandoned this family. My father's hand went to the bed rail, knuckles white. We blocked her number, Claire, because you told us to. Aunt Grace walked into the ICU at 9:45 that morning. I had called her from the scrub room right after surgery, not as a weapon, but because Claire was Grace's niece too, and Grace deserved to know. But Grace arrived prepared because 5 years of watching a family get dismantled from the inside will do that to a woman with a long memory and a very specific filing system. She did not sit down when she walked in, did not hug anyone, did not offer any of the social softeners she was entirely capable of producing. She stood in the center of that room and said, I have been waiting 5 years to have this conversation, and I am not waiting one more minute. She pulled out her phone and opened a folder she had labeled, I found out later, simply, Nora Proof. Inside, screenshots of every email I had sent my parents in those first 5 desperate days, complete with all attachments. My leave of absence documentation from USU, signed by the dean and stamped with the registrar's seal, my re-enrollment confirmation, and a photograph from my residency commissioning graduation. Me in a cap holding the diploma, Aunt Grace standing beside me, the only family member in the frame. She held the phone out. My mother took it with both hands trembling. And here, Grace said, swiping to a separate text thread. This is a message from Claire to me, sent 4 years ago. She read it aloud without hesitation. Don't tell Mom and Dad about Nora's residency. It'll just confuse them. They're finally at peace. The room went absolutely still. Claire stared at the ceiling, her jaw set, but the calculation was gone from her eyes, and what replaced it was something I had never seen there before. The expression of someone who has finally run out of rooms to run to. You told me to keep quiet for the family's sake, Grace said, looking directly at Claire. But this family hasn't had peace. It's had a 5-year blackout. Then she turned to my parents, and her voice was not angry so much as ancient and completely spent. And the two of you. You let this happen, not because you didn't love Nora, but because loving Claire was easier. Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue with. My mother sank into the chair beside the bed, but she was not looking at Claire. She was scrolling through Grace's phone, reading my emails one by one, her lips moving as she read, the way people move their lips when words matter too much to process silently. She stopped on the last one. I know what it says. I have reread it in my own sent folder more times than I will admit to. Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I graduated from residency today. I wish you were here. I'm still your daughter. I never stopped being your daughter. My mother doubled over in the chair, not crying in any ordinary sense, but collapsing inward. the way structures collapse when the load-bearing support is suddenly gone. My father stood at the window with his back to the room, and his shoulders were shaking. Aunt Grace told me later that in 62 years, she had never once seen her older brother cry. Not at their mother's funeral, not when his business nearly failed, not ever. He was crying now, silently, facing a hospital parking lot in the early morning light while the monitor beeped behind him and the IV dripped. And Claire lay in the bed with her eyes fixed on the ceiling and nothing left to perform, and no audience remaining who would believe her. "You missed her wedding, Frank," Grace said, and her voice was quiet, carrying only the weight of the fact itself. Marcus's father walked her down the aisle. "Do you understand what that means?" My father did not turn from the window. But 4 words came out of him, low and cracked straight down the center. "What have we done?" Not a question. He was not asking. He was convicting himself in the only court that had any jurisdiction left over him. I came back at the end of my shift, 22 hours after the pager had gone off. And my parents were still there. Of course they were, because where else would they go? My mother stood up the moment I walked in, her face swollen and her eyes nearly shut from crying. "Nora, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so—" I held up one hand, gently but unmistakably. "I hear you," I said. "And I believe that you are sorry. But sorry is a word. It is a starting place, not a finish line. What I need right now is time." My father turned from the window, looking like he had aged 5 years in 12 hours. "We want to make this right." "Then you need to understand something," I said, and my voice was even because this was not anger anymore. This was clarity. The kind that only comes after you have burned through every other emotion, and what is left is the truth, clean and simple, and without any need for decoration. I am not the girl you sent away. I am not the girl who begged you from nearly 2,000 miles away with $46 to her name and a dying friend in the next room. I am someone who built a life, a whole life, without you. And if you want to be part of it now, it will be on my terms, not Claire's, not yours, mine. My father opened his mouth, old reflex, then closed it and nodded. A small, devastated nod that contained more honesty than anything he had offered me in 32 years. I looked at Claire on the bed. Her eyes were open, watching me. "When you're recovered, you and I are going to have a real conversation, but not today. Today, you are my patient. I don't mix the two." I left, spine straight, steps measured. I was not closing the door, but I was the one who would decide when it opened, how wide, and who walked through. 2 weeks after Claire's discharge, I chose a coffee shop in Tyson's Corner, neutral ground, halfway between her apartment in Arlington and my house in Rockville. And Marcus came with me, sitting at a separate table near the window where he could see me and I could see him. Claire walked in looking like someone who had been hollowed out and then set back down, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with health, the confidence she had always worn like a second skin entirely absent. She sat down and wrapped both hands around a cup she didn't drink from and stared at the table. I did not do preamble. "I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to list every lie. You know what you did. What I want to know is why." The silence lasted long enough that the barista called out someone's order and the sound echoed off the walls. Then Claire said, "Because you were going to be everything I wasn't, and I couldn't handle it." I let that sit. "That's honest," I said. "It's the first honest thing you've said to me in 10 years. I'm sorry, Nora." "I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back the years. Sorry doesn't put Dad at my wedding. Sorry doesn't unreturn that box of my commissioning photos you had Mom ship back to me. My childhood things, mailed like I was already dead to her." She looked away, and the tears that came were real ones. I have spent enough time in medicine reading people to know the difference with certainty now. Then she said something I had not been expecting. "I also contacted USU twice. I tried to get them to investigate your caregiver deferment paperwork. I told them you'd fabricated the documents. The coffee shop hummed gently around us. Your dean wouldn't act on it, she added. I looked at her for a long moment. He didn't protect me, Claire, I said. He believed the truth. That's not the same thing. I laid out my conditions the way Marcus had helped me structure them the night before, sitting on the kitchen floor with Ranger's head in my lap. A full written disclosure to every family member she had lied to. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who had spent 5 years believing I was in rehab or homeless or had deliberately cut off the family. Sent to the family group thread, all 47 recipients, with Aunt Grace confirming delivery. Claire nodded. She would do it. She would do it in writing. I met with my parents separately the following week, at their kitchen table. The same table where my father had read my acceptance letter all those years ago. The same table where Claire had smiled with just her mouth the night everything began. I am open to rebuilding, I said. But I need both of you to commit to family counseling, together with a therapist in McLean. Not for me, for yourselves. You need to understand how you believed a lie about your own daughter for 5 years without once picking up the phone to check. My father's jaw tightened. We don't do things like that in this family. That is exactly why we are here, Dad. My mother placed her hand gently on his arm. Frank, please. He looked at her. He looked at me. Something behind his eyes did not open, but cracked. The very beginning of an opening. Fine. I stood to leave, then turned back one more time. Marcus's father walked me down the aisle. That happened and we cannot undo it. But if you want to know your future grandchildren, you start now, not with grand gestures, with consistency. Apologies expire, boundaries don't. That is the difference between sentiment and structure. 1 month later, the annual Military Medical Corps Excellence Gala at the Marriott Bethesda North, 200 people in a ballroom that smelled of hors d'oeuvres and open-bar optimism, surgeons and department heads and hospital administrators and board members and crystal glasses catching the chandelier light. Marcus was at a front table, looking like he had been born in a suit. Dr. Carol Briggs sat beside him, arms crossed, wearing the faintest version of the smile she reserves for moments she has been quietly engineering for months. The MC stepped to the podium. This year's recipient of the annual Military Medical Excellence Award, a surgeon whose clinical precision, operational composure under pressure, and unwavering commitment to her patients have set a new standard for this institution and for the Army Medical Corps. Major Nora Hayes, Chief, Department of Trauma Surgery, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I walked to the stage in a simple black dress and kept it short. 5 years ago, I almost walked away from this. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because I had lost the people I believed I needed to keep going. What I learned is that the people you need are not always the ones you were born to. Sometimes they are the ones who choose you. I looked at Carol, at Marcus, at my team in the 3rd row. Then I looked at the back of the ballroom, where 2 seats in the last row, seats Grace had quietly arranged as a fact rather than a gesture, held my parents. My mother in a navy dress she had clearly bought that week. My father in a tie he clearly hated. Both sitting with their hands in their laps, looking up at the stage with expressions I can only describe as grief and pride waging war on the same face at the same time. And sometimes, I said, the ones you were born to find their way back, late, but here. My mother covered her mouth. My father stood. Applause filled the rest. After the ceremony, my father found Marcus near the coat check and stood in front of him for a long, silent moment before speaking. I owe you an apology. I should have been the one to walk her down that aisle. Marcus, who is gracious in a way that is constitution rather than performance, extended his hand. With all due respect, sir, you should have been a lot of things, but we're here now. They shook hands, and my father did not let go right away. Claire sent the family email on a Wednesday night, and Grace confirmed delivery to all 47 addresses. I did not read it until Thursday morning, when Marcus brought coffee and set the laptop on the kitchen table without a word. He always knows when to give me space and when to give me company. The email was 3 paragraphs, no preamble, no excuses, just the facts laid bare. She had lied about my leaving medical school, she had fabricated evidence, she had maintained the deception for 5 years, and she had deliberately prevented our parents from learning the truth. The final line? Nora never abandoned this family. I made sure they believed she did. That is entirely on me. The responses came in waves. Uncle Ray's wife called Grace in tears. She had repeated Claire's rehab story at a book club 2 years prior and had no idea it was invented. Cousin Drew in Vermont sent Claire a one-line reply that said only, "I don't know who you are anymore." Nana June, 89 years old, the family matriarch, who had stopped asking about me at holiday dinners because Claire had told her it was too painful for Mom and Dad, called me directly. And her voice was paper-thin but unmistakably furious. "I am 89 years old, and I have never been lied to so thoroughly by my own blood. Forgive an old woman for not seeing it, Nora." "There's nothing to forgive, Nana June. You were lied to. We all were." No one organized a boycott, no group texts, no public condemnation. But the trust Claire had spent 35 years accumulating quietly evaporated, and the invitations that had been part of the fabric of her social life stopped arriving one by one. And for someone who had built her entire identity on being the one everyone believed, that was the only consequence that truly mattered. My parents began counseling in February with a therapist in McLean named Dr. Rena. Calm, methodical. The kind of professional who does not allow evasion without naming it precisely. My mother took to it almost immediately, breaking down in the first session when Dr. Rena named what she had been doing for decades, enabling through silence. My father struggled. He went, he sat, he answered in as few words as the questions allowed, and Dr. Rena told him, through Grace, that his structural need to be right, his refusal to revisit a decision once made, had been the load-bearing wall of the entire disaster. Claire had provided the lie, but Frank Hayes's pride had cemented it into place. He did not argue with that assessment. That may have been the first real sign of change. 3 weeks into their counseling, my mother mailed me a letter. Handwritten, because the irony of the medium was not lost on either of us. "I failed you," she wrote. "Not just when I believed Claire, but every time before that when I chose peace over fairness. Every time I let your father's certainty decide what was true without asking you. Every time I saw you standing in the doorway, quiet and waiting, and told myself you were fine because it was easier than admitting I was not brave enough to fight for you." I read it at the kitchen table with Ranger asleep across my feet and Marcus in the next room, not quite pretending not to listen. I did not cry, but I held that letter for a long time before I opened the drawer where I keep the things that matter most. Jade's sticky note, my returned letters, the wedding invitation that had come back unopened, and placed it inside. Same drawer, different side. Progress is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply rearranging what you carry. Claire started her own therapy, separate from the family sessions. And I know this because Grace mentioned it and because Claire brought it up herself, briefly and awkwardly, the second time we met for coffee in Tyson's Corner. We have had 3 of these meetings now, each short, each uncomfortable in a different way, each one slightly more honest than the one before. The third time she said something I was not entirely prepared to receive. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I want you to know I'm trying not to be that person anymore." I took a sip of my coffee, set the cup down and said, "Then show me. Words have always been cheap in this family. Show me with time." She nodded, and she didn't push, and she didn't perform. That was new. She carries my surgical scar on her body, 7 inches, left upper quadrant, fading from red to silver over the coming year. The kind of mark that catches the light when you reach for something on a high shelf and reveals itself whether you intend it to or not. Every time she gets dressed, every time she catches her reflection in the right angle of light, she will see the mark left by the sister she spent 5 years trying to erase. The sister who, when the moment came, and she had every reason and every right to walk away, picked up a scalpel with steady hands and chose the oath over the anger. I carry what she did in the space between memory and daily life, lodged somewhere between my ribs. Present the way old injuries are present, not as active pain exactly, but as weather. We are even, in the strangest and most painful way two sisters can be even. And maybe with enough time, real time, unglamorous and consistent and free of performance, we'll find our way to something that isn't just even, but something genuinely new. I am sitting in my office at Walter Reed as I tell you this, late on a weeknight, the hallway outside carrying that specific hospital stillness that settles in after the last visitors leave and before the night shift fully wakes. My nameplate is on the door. My diplomas are on the wall. Not because I need to see them, but because the residents who come in here do. And I remember exactly what it felt like to need to see that something like this was possible. On my desk, a framed wedding photo, Marcus, Carol Briggs, Aunt Grace, 30 guests, a backyard in October light, no parents in the frame. But on the bookshelf beside it, a new photograph taken 3 weeks ago. My parents standing on the front porch of my house in Rockville in their winter coats, looking slightly lost. My mother mid-smile, and trying too hard and trying nonetheless. My father with his hands in his pockets, in the way men put their hands in their pockets when they do not know what else to do with them. It is awkward, it is imperfect, it is real. If you are listening to this right now and you see yourself somewhere in it, whether you are the one who was silenced or the one who did the silencing, or the one who is still somewhere in between, I want to tell you something I have come to understand slowly and without ceremony over 5 years of building a life that had no business being as good as it turned out to be. The truth does not expire. It does not matter if it takes 5 days or 5 years. The truth has a patient way of arriving exactly when it is needed most, and you cannot rush it, but you cannot outrun it either. I did not get revenge on my sister. I did not need revenge. I became someone who didn't need it, and that turned out to be the most complete and irreversible response available to me. Not a scheme, not a plan, just a life lived fully on my own terms. And if you are waiting for your family to see you, to really see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build the life you deserve with the people who show up. And when the others finally turn around, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide. You decide who walks through. That is not revenge. That is architecture. Sunday morning, first week of February, light snow falling outside the kitchen window in Rockville. The kind that doesn't stick, but makes everything look like it is being quietly and gently forgiven. I am making French toast. Marcus is grinding coffee beans and singing off-key to something on the kitchen radio. Ranger is stationed under the table in his permanent position of optimism regarding the likelihood of crumbs. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a dish towel and open the front door. My parents are on the porch in their winter coats. My father is holding a bottle of orange juice with the careful grip of a man who is not entirely sure what to do with his hands. My mother is holding a tin of homemade shortbread, the kind she used to bake for every school event and every performance that ever belonged to Claire, and none that ever belonged to me. "Hi," my mother says, nervous and hopeful in equal measure, and entirely unperformed. "Come in," I say. "Coffee's almost ready." My father steps inside and looks around my kitchen with the careful attention of a man cataloging something he has never encountered before. The house he has never been in, the life he almost never knew existed, the counters and the window light and the dog under the table and the sound of a marriage that has nothing in it that he built and everything in it that he missed. He clears his throat. "Can I help with anything?" I look at him, 62 years old, standing in my kitchen for the first time in his life, asking permission to be useful. And I say, "You can set the table, Dad." He nods and goes to the cabinet I point to, takes out the plates, counts them, and looks at me. 4. 4. He sets them down one by one, carefully, like they might break if he is not gentle. Marcus hands him a cup of coffee. My mother hugs me at the stove. Not a movie hug, not the kind of reconciliation scene you see on a screen, just a quiet one. Arms around me, forehead against my shoulder, holding on without any words at all, because the words have already been said, and what remains now is simply the physical fact of being present. Ranger thumps his tail against the floor. Snow falls outside. The French toast sizzles. It is not perfect. It is not the childhood I deserved or the reconciliation that movies tend to promise. But it is real, and real is more than I had for a very long time. If this story reached something in you, if it made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, or someone you've lost contact with and may still be waiting on, leave me a comment and tell me, what would you have done? Would you have opened that door? And if you want more stories like this one, I've linked something in the description that I think you'll love just as much. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. It genuinely means more than you know. Thank you for being here with me today. I'll see you next time.